Black mom denied access to private jet. Turns out her son own it, and he fires the entire crew. Have you ever felt dismissed or judged simply because of the way you look? This isn't just a story about one incident. It's a powerful reminder of how assumptions and biases can lead to unfair treatment, and how standing up for respect can turn the tide against prejudice. The crisp morning air wrapped around Grace Johnson as she stepped out of the sleek black car. At 75, her movements were deliberate, and her posture exuded a quiet elegance honed over decades of life and experience. Grace's silver-gray hair, styled in soft curls, framed her face, and her tailored coat hugged her petite frame, adding an air of sophistication to her presence. Despite her age, she carried herself with a poise that could silence a room. The private terminal was the epitome of luxury. Polished floors gleamed under the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Travelers mingled in hushed conversations, their designer luggage and crisp suits a testament to the exclusivity of the space. Grace pulled a modest suitcase behind her as she walked through the automatic doors, her heels making soft, measured clicks against the polished floor. She approached the reception desk, where a young attendant greeted her with a polite smile. Her uniform was sharp, her demeanor professional, but there was a fleeting moment of hesitation in her expression. "Good morning, ma'am," the receptionist said, her tone courteous but slightly restrained. "How may I assist you?" Grace responded with a calm and steady voice. "I'm Grace Johnson. I'm here for the jet to Miami." The attendant's fingers danced across the keyboard as she checked the reservation. A brief furrow appeared on her brow before she masked it with her professionalism. "Ah, yes, I see the reservation," she said quickly. "It's scheduled to depart shortly. Shall I escort you to the gate?" Grace nodded. "Thank you." The attendant stepped out from behind the desk and led Grace down a plush carpeted hallway toward Gate 7. Parked just outside on the tarmac was a pristine white jet, its tail emblazoned with the logo of a prestigious logistics company. Standing at the base of the jet's staircase was the captain, a tall man in his 40s with a crisp uniform and an air of authority. As they approached, the attendant gestured toward Grace. "This is Mrs. Johnson, boarding the flight to Miami," she informed the captain. The captain's eyes swept over Grace, his expression tightening. His brow furrowed as he took her in, her age, her understated luggage, her graceful but unassuming presence. "This is a private charter," he said, his tone clipped. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" Grace straightened her posture, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Yes, I'm quite sure." His expression remained skeptical. "And do you have a boarding pass?" he asked, his tone bordering on condescension. Before Grace could respond, another flight attendant approached, clipboard in hand. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her eyes flicking between Grace and the captain. "I'm just confirming," the captain replied curtly, his tone laden with doubt. "It's not common to have last-minute changes for this type of flight." Grace, remaining composed, retrieved her phone from her handbag. With a few swipes, she pulled up the reservation details and handed the phone to the attendant. "Here you go," she said calmly. The attendant scanned the screen, her demeanor softening immediately. "Everything's in order," she said, glancing at the captain. "Mrs. Johnson is confirmed for this flight." The captain's jaw tightened as he reluctantly stepped aside. "Very well," he said curtly. "Welcome aboard, ma'am." Grace nodded politely and began to ascend the steps to the jet, but the weight of the captain's judgment and doubt lingered in the air. As Grace Johnson stepped onto the sleek white jet, she was met with a flurry of subtle yet unmistakable dismissals. The captain's curt tone lingered, his forced "welcome aboard" doing little to mask the skepticism etched into his expression. Behind him, two flight attendants exchanged furtive glances, their whispers just loud enough for Grace's sharp ears to catch. "She doesn't look like she belongs here," one murmured, her tone tinged with disbelief. Grace paused momentarily, her hands resting on the polished rail of the staircase. She had heard comments like this before, dismissive judgments based solely on her appearance. Yet, rather than react, she simply continued into the luxurious cabin, her calm composure unwavering. Inside, the jet was every bit as opulent as one would expect. Plush leather seats, polished wood finishes, and the faint scent of fresh flowers created an atmosphere of exclusivity. Grace carefully placed her modest bag beside a seat, her movements deliberate and dignified, though the sting of the crew's assumptions lingered in her chest. Moments later, the captain entered the cabin, his tone overly formal, an attempt to reassert control. "Mrs. Johnson, we'll be departing shortly," he announced. "May I ask who arranged this flight?" Grace's lips curled into a faint smile, her composure unshaken despite the blatant insinuation. "My son, Elijah Johnson," she replied evenly, her voice carrying both strength and grace. "He owns this jet." The captain's expression faltered, the confidence draining from his face as the weight of her words settled in. "Your son?" he echoed, his tone suddenly hesitant. "That's correct," Grace confirmed, her gaze steady, "and I suspect he'll want to hear about how I've been treated today." Nothing wrong. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the crew visibly uncomfortable as Grace calmly retrieved her phone. She tapped a number and waited for the call to connect. "Elijah," she said when her son answered, her tone steady but firm. "I'm on the jet, but there's an issue with the crew. They've made it abundantly clear they don't think I belong here. I need you to handle this." She ended the call with the same composed grace she had maintained throughout the encounter, setting her phone down on the table. Internally, though, Grace couldn't ignore the familiar sting of prejudice. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged based on her appearance, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But her years of experience had taught her to rise above such moments with dignity. As the hum of the jet's engines filled the cabin, she clasped her hands in her lap, her resolve firm. Grace Johnson knew that dignity and composure were her greatest strengths, even in the face of blatant disrespect. As Grace Johnson settled into the jet's luxurious cabin, she became increasingly aware of the crew's subtle but telling behavior. Though the attendants moved about with the practiced efficiency expected of a private charter team, their glances lingered just a second too long. Whispers, barely hushed, punctuated the otherwise serene atmosphere. Grace's sharp ears caught one murmur. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." The words hit like a sting, familiar and cutting. Grace had spent a lifetime encountering such judgments, moments when her presence was met with doubt, her worth questioned. But years of experience had taught her not to let the prejudice of others rattle her composure. Instead, she straightened her posture, her hands resting lightly in her lap, a picture of quiet dignity. When the captain entered the cabin, his demeanor matched the tension that had been building. His tone was formal, but carried an edge of skepticism. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, "we'll be departing shortly. May I ask who arranged this flight?" Grace met his gaze, her expression calm yet resolute. "My son, Elijah Johnson," she replied evenly. "He owns this jet." The captain's confident facade flickered, the realization creeping into his features. "Your son?" he repeated, his tone faltering as he struggled to process the truth. "That's correct," Grace said firmly, "and I suspect he'd be very interested in hearing how I've been treated so far today." The cabin fell silent. The attendants, who had been busy with pre-flight checks, froze mid-action, exchanging uneasy glances. The tension in the air was palpable. Grace reached into her handbag and retrieved her phone. With a few quick taps, she dialed a number. "Elijah," she said, when her son answered, her tone steady but laced with quiet authority. "I'm on the jet, but there's an issue with the crew. They've made it abundantly clear they don't think I belong here. I need you to handle this." She ended the call and set the phone down, her calm demeanor never wavering. Internally, however, Grace felt the familiar ache of being underestimated, of having her presence questioned simply because of how she looked. It wasn't anger that filled her, but a deep, weary disappointment, a reminder that, even after decades of progress, some prejudices still persisted. But Grace had long learned to handle such moments with grace. The sting of their judgment might linger, but it wouldn't define her. She had spent her life teaching her children resilience, dignity, and the importance of standing firm against injustice. And now, as the jet hummed with anticipation for takeoff, she knew Elijah would uphold those lessons. As the jet's engines idled on the tarmac, Grace Johnson reached for her phone with the same composed grace she had maintained throughout the morning. The crew's whispered judgments and dismissive glances had been undeniable, yet she refused to let their prejudice provoke her. Instead, she dialed her son, Elijah Johnson, the owner of the very jet they were standing on. "Elijah," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I'm on the jet, but there's an issue with the crew. They've made it abundantly clear they don't think I belong here. I need you to handle this." There was no anger in her tone, just a quiet strength and certainty that Elijah, as always, would act decisively. After a brief exchange, she ended the call, setting the phone down on the polished table in front of her. The cabin fell into a tense silence as the crew exchanged uneasy glances, the implications of Grace's words beginning to sink in. Minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the terminal, and Elijah stepped out, his presence radiating authority. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his movements were deliberate and purposeful as he made his way toward the jet. The crew outside straightened instinctively, sensing the gravity of the situation. When Elijah boarded the aircraft, his expression was firm, his eyes scanning the cabin before locking onto his mother. "Mother," he said warmly, taking her hands. "Are you all right?" Grace offered him a faint smile, her calm demeanor unchanged. "I'm fine, Elijah," she replied, "but this crew needs to learn a lesson in respect." Elijah nodded, his jaw tightening as he turned to address the assembled crew now standing awkwardly in the cabin doorway. His voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "My mother deserves the same respect you'd show any client. No, more than that. She's the reason I'm where I am today, and she deserves nothing less than your utmost professionalism. The fact that she didn't receive that is unacceptable." The captain opened his mouth to respond, but Elijah cut him off with a sharp look. "There's nothing more to say," he continued. "Your actions have already spoken for you." Turning to the rest of the crew, he added, "Effective immediately, you're all relieved of your duties. I'll be assembling a new team, one that understands what it means to represent this company and its values." The crew stood frozen, their discomfort palpable as the weight of their actions sank in. Heads lowered, they began to file out of the cabin, avoiding both Elijah's piercing gaze and Grace's calm, knowing eyes. As the last of the crew departed, Elijah returned to his mother's side, his expression softening. "It's taken care of, Mom," he said. "No one disrespects you and gets away with it." Grace's face relaxed into a warm smile. "Thank you, Elijah," she said. "I've raised you well." With the cabin now quiet and the tension dissipated, Grace leaned back into the plush seat, gazing out at the clouds as the jet prepared for takeoff. In that moment, she knew that while the world still had much to learn, she had raised a son who would stand up for what was right and for her. As the crew stood awkwardly near the base of the jet's steps, Malcolm Johnson turned to face them. His sharp suit and commanding presence exuded the authority of a successful CEO, but it was the intensity in his eyes that held their attention. His voice, calm yet firm, cut through the heavy silence. "My mother deserves the same respect and courtesy you would extend to any client," he began, his words deliberate. "She has spent her life teaching me about hard work, resilience, and dignity, values that I built this company on, and yet, today, she was met with condescension, doubt, and dismissal by a team that represents me and my brand." The crew shifted uneasily under his piercing gaze, the weight of their actions becoming impossible to ignore. Malcolm's tone sharpened, his disappointment evident. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear. Respect and dignity are non-negotiable, regardless of someone's appearance, age, or how you assume they got here. The fact that you judged my mother without even taking a moment to understand who she is or why she was here is unacceptable and frankly disgraceful." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Effective immediately, this crew is relieved of their duties," he said, his voice resolute. "I will be assembling a new team, one that understands what it means to uphold the values of respect, professionalism, and inclusivity." The captain opened his mouth to protest, but Malcolm silenced him with a pointed look. "There's nothing more to discuss. Your actions have already spoken loud and clear." As the crew turned to leave, their heads hanging low, Malcolm looked back at his mother, who watched the scene with quiet strength. Turning to the remaining staff, he added, "Let this be a lesson to everyone here. Assumptions and prejudice have no place in this company or anywhere else. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter who they are or how they look." The message was clear. In Malcolm's world, there was no tolerance for anything less than fairness and dignity. His actions not only upheld his mother's honor, but also sent a powerful reminder about the importance of challenging prejudice and standing up for what is right. As the jet ascended into the clouds, Grace Johnson finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The confrontation had been draining, but the unwavering support of her son Elijah filled her with a deep sense of gratitude. She turned to him, her eyes soft but brimming with pride. "Thank you, Elijah," she said, her voice steady. "You didn't have to come all the way here, but you did. I hope you know how much that means to me." Elijah reached over and took her hands, his expression both tender and resolute. "I'll always have your back, Mom," he replied. "No one disrespects you, not on my watch." Grace smiled, her heart warmed by his words. She had raised her children to be strong, fair, and compassionate, and moments like this reminded her that the lessons she had instilled had taken root. The sting of prejudice was nothing new to her. She had faced it many times before. But knowing her son stood firmly by her side was a solace she treasured deeply. As she gazed out of the window at the endless expanse of sky, Grace's thoughts drifted to the journey of her life. She reflected on the countless times she had been judged, dismissed, or overlooked simply because of her appearance. While such moments never lost their sting, she had learned to confront them with dignity and strength. Change doesn't happen overnight, she thought to herself, but it starts with moments like these, with standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Grace knew the world still had a long way to go. Assumptions and prejudice continued to rear their ugly heads, but she found hope in knowing that every confrontation, every act of courage, chipped away at the walls of bias. As the jet soared higher, she turned her thoughts to the future, finding solace in the belief that, step by step, the world could become a place where respect and dignity were extended to all, regardless of appearances. It wasn't a far-off dream, it was a possibility, one confrontation at a time. This moment was more than just about her. It was a reminder that the fight for justice and equality begins with actions, big or small, that uphold the values of respect, fairness, and humanity. Grace Johnson's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of treating everyone with respect, no matter their appearance or background. The way we judge or dismiss others based on assumptions not only reveals our own biases, but also perpetuates a cycle of prejudice and inequality. This moment, though painful, demonstrates the profound impact of standing up against such injustice with dignity and strength. Elijah's unwavering support for his mother shows how crucial it is to challenge these biases whenever they arise. By addressing the situation head-on, he not only defended his mother's honor, but also set a standard for respect and professionalism, reminding us all that actions speak louder than words. This story isn't just about Grace and Elijah, it's about the world we live in and the choices we make every day. It's a call to reflect on our own assumptions. How often do we judge someone without knowing their story, and what might happen if we chose to lead with respect instead of prejudice? So ask yourself, how would you want to be treated if roles were reversed? This simple yet profound question can be the foundation of a more just and compassionate society. Every small act of fairness and understanding contributes to a larger wave of change. Thank you for watching this video and for taking the time to consider this important story. If this resonated with you, please share your thoughts or any similar experiences in the comments below. Together, we can create conversations that challenge stereotypes and advocate for fairness. And remember, change starts with us, one respectful interaction at a time. Until next time, stay kind, stay just, and let's build a world where dignity is extended to all.